Welcome back to Side Quests IX, episode 8. Back with me, my constant companion and perennial party member, Wes. Wes, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm doing great. I had a nice hike this morning, and I know that you put in a lot of work yourself in this game, and I have voluminous amounts of notes in front of me
Good.
concerning what we have to talk about. All interesting stuff. So I don't want to bore anybody by mentioning notes. But I think if somebody plays RPGs, they may not. It would be interesting to see how well people who play RPGs do in school. And
Yeah.
even if they aren't academically gifted, I still would imagine that they're the sorts of people that enjoy certain subjects because there's a lot of learning involved in the role-playing game itself.
Well, yeah. So, some people carry around a notebook or a sketchbook or something, and it's kind of like their little, accessory. And I think there's people out there who think taking notes is pretty cool. So
I agree.
those are our people.
And we talked about it. There's a bit of meta commentary before we get into launch into the actual summary of the game and analysis itself. But taking notes is of tremendous value. I know this not only as somebody who's had to take tests and write things at points, but also as somebody who gives lectures and has talks. Before we got on the show, the amount of things that I was reminded of by the visual notes I've been taking playing this game, this lesser port that I'm playing at, and what it frankly might be a lesser console too, the Switch compared to say the might of the PS5. Um, but taking these notes has been essential because even though I maintain a general kernel and I think a pretty good idea of what I've just been through with the game, without seeing the specifics put in front of me that my notes do, they allow a level of analysis and connection to the game that I just wouldn't otherwise have. And then my analysis would be of more general features rather than specific features, and I think would be less illuminated and illuminating without them. So I think notes are profoundly important.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I so what I use, I mean, I sort of cheat, but I'm always looking at these playthrough archives of screenshots and there's a certain amount of commentary, but mostly it's just like transcription of all the text, and that helps me kind of keep straight what's going on in each section of the game. And it also helps that I played it really recently, so that's also a
teacher,
cheat code there.
they say that you're supposed to steal as a teacher, and there's
There.
this great quote that good writers borrow, great writers steal.
Yes.
Um, but okay, so we had gotten to Cleyra last time, and I was again having not reviewed my notes as well last time, mixing some things together. But a lot happens at Cleyra, both prior to the tornado around it dispelling and after, of course.
Hmm.
Um, and so we had been in the prior moment last time. You had gotten there. We talked a little bit about deserts and the difference between the Burmesians and the Clarins, though they may be sort of a suzerainty. It's hard to tell. We did see the dance of the crystal
Mm.
or the jewel today with the harp, or for today, and well, and something we noticed there is that in the background there are five dancers, including Freya from our own party. Nice bit of engagement. The high priest and the king sit and witness.
Hmm.
And so they have some sort of connected relationship. Therefore, I don't know if it's like a pope and the king sort of situation from our own reality, where they have independent authorities of each other, but one confers it to the other and one respects the others, or whether they are in fact independent. But we do see the harp snap and the tornado go down. We see a boss who's actually himself a throwback to, I think, all the way back into Final Fantasy III, the Ant Lion.
Mm.
Very famous old boss. In fact, Final Fantasy Union includes the Ant Lion in one of his videos on enemies, obscure enemies that come and go in the series. Um, and then so we also get to see a major CGI, and we saw two for this playthrough, and they featured basically the same subject matter. Um, we see Odin summoned and the reaction of Queen Brahne, which I think is very particular and revealing. continually revealing. It's in line with what we've seen of her reactions prior. We get to see the might of Odin, and then we see the aftermath of
Mhm.
that. We then abscond onto the Red Rose, the airship of the Queen, see Beatrix sort of fighting within herself, and use this teleportation technology to return to Alexandria, where we reconnect with Steiner. During this time,
Yes.
Dagger has confronted her mother about her role in what happened at Bermesia, and Kuja appears and uses very theatrical language, says he wants to play a part. She's sort of
Mhm.
shocked by this sort of frivolous, ludicrous language and ludic language in a way. Um, and he calls her an angel and uses the language of destiny with her as well. Very much enjoying playing this part. You can tell that some of the bad guys, some of the antagonists, the early antagonists in Final Fantasy, seem to truly enjoy the role that they're playing.
Yeah.
As much as they try and fight against their own mortality, they seem to have a sense that this is their moment.
Mhm.
And then we see an Eidolon extraction, during which Braun says that now Garnet will be helpless
Mhm.
against us. Uh, Back on Beatrix's ship, Marcus leaves the group, I guess, or sorry, back with Steiner, Marcus leaves the group to go use Supersoft in the
That's right.
forest. And yes, we find out that Dagger is supposed to be executed.
Mhm.
And we get her back, though she doesn't seem to be in great shape. And this is, yeah, that's a motif that we've run into a lot, at least across the last few Final Fantasies. We have another fight. We're put into two parties. We get trapped in the same mechanism by Zorn and Thorn that we've been trapped in before, which reminds me that I've left out quite a few things. We see Gargan Rue with the giant ants beneath the surface of the world, and so again, trying finding the bedrock of this civilization, finding the foundations, digging deeper into this world and learning more about it and its depths. Um, then we see two bounty hunters hired. Apparently, we're not going for black waltzes anymore to
Mhm.
deal with Garnet. And Braun describes Vivi as a renegade black mage, which she defines as a soulless golem.
Mhm.
Um, right. Then we get to the Pinnacle Rock, see another awful summon, this time of the Eidolon. I was about to say GF, that you reminded me is called Atomos.
Yeah.
And you said the first iteration. This is all from Wes. It's from Final Fantasy V, and it looks like it's going to consume entirely Lindblum, but it stops because Cid capitulates. And by the end of this playing, it's starting to look a lot like Alexandria, something like a Shinra or a Galbadia,
Mhm.
or whatever Final Fantasy VI's kingdom was called with the Emperor.
Oh
Emperor,
yeah.
was his name Emperor Gerstal? Uh,
Yeah. 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 Gestalt.
yeah, and so right, he takes action, I guess. And so that was, I'm sorry, a pretty long-winded summary that did definitely leave out quite a bit. And it looks like we have our work cut out for us today, Wes.
It's all good. I mean, there's so many details because, yeah, we're covering a pretty long block of the game here. But I think when you were talking about this, when you were playing it, I remember you saying that the game really kind of hooked you at a certain point.
Yes.
I'm guessing it was around here because of the way that the pacing really picks up. You're jumping back and forth between parties. You're trying to save this person, that person. Pretty soon you've got to save yourselves, or someone comes and saves you, right? Unexpectedly enough, it's Blank. It's Blank and Marcus of all people who rescue our party after they're caught in the same darn trap. Once again from Zorn and Thorn.
And
And
Blake gets to see you in your same role. So for all the growing that you've ostensibly done,
yeah,
even Steiner has done, even though he gets, banged on by Baku, where it's like, have you really been around today so long and you still so superficial in your perceptions? Uh, but he sees Zidane in the same role that he's always seen him in this
yeah,
role where he requires his help.
that's
And
right.
I mean,
So
as a player, it's pretty frustrating. As I was going through that, and I recall this from my playthrough, I was like, "Is this going to? Oh my!"
is this really happening? Yeah. Uh, I was also unsure, but I read somewhere that there's an optional boss in Alexandria Castle at this point. I did not do that, and it's during the portion of that where there's a timer running, and so it is not advised to go and try to do that at this point. Um, but it indicates again that there are secrets in this game that even a pretty in-depth playthrough discussion is not going to touch. And this reminds me also that as I was listening to the Resonant Arc series on this, there's a few things that they bring up that are they're text that is still on the game disc, but text that doesn't appear without actually going in and extracting it. And I don't know the exact process to do that, but it's a thing that people do. They mine these games for the actual kind of code and the data and find things in there that are not actually going to manifest unless you go and hunt for them that way.
Like a
And so
character or something like that.
it's in this case, it's text about sort of the lore behind the Burmecia, Lindblum, Alexandria, uh, the past wars that have been going on. And it's something about how the king was lost in one of these previous wars, maybe even the most recent war that they're currently in a truce at the start of this game, right? But there has been a recent war in which the king was lost, whatever that
That
means.
was Queen Brahne's husband, and
Presumably, yeah, right. And so the problem though that they bring up has to do with the chronology, where they say something about it was like 30 years ago that this war started. And so either the war went on for approximately 15 years for the king to actually be able to be the father of Garnet, or there is a different parentage, which we've already suspected, right? That she's not actually the daughter of this king and especially not the daughter of Bronn. Like a lot of characters are pointing out, like, how is there a resemblance between them at all?
there
And
doesn't seem to be. Right.
and so so again there's like this leads to another series of possibilities. Like has Bronn transformed physically as well as mentally, spiritually? And but that's not something that is really mentioned. And so basically where they get with this is just to say, A, there's a lot of data in these games that a playthrough level analysis is not going to actually surface. And so that's things about the mechanics and about the code, and that's all interesting stuff. But it's a little bit beside the point, I think, if what you're looking at is what the game actually has for the player. And presumably, this is the version of this game that was intended to be released because like the code is there. It's not a problem of the disk having enough storage. It's about the coherence of the experience. And so they ended up cutting that probably at the last minute and left it there in the code, but actually just kind of have it dormant, hidden, or whatever. I think the term they use is dummy code, and and that's kind of interesting stuff. But all just to say, yeah, there is, of course, this is not like an exhaustive or the be all end all decision. So I just want to be able to kind of touch down in certain places in this section of the game, which are particularly interesting for the kinds of themes, the character development that we've been seeing, and just other aspects of the player experience that I think are are special in this game, and at this point where it's kind of one of the high points of this entry in the series, this portion here, as we're rescuing. Um, well, I think if we're keeping track here, first we dive in, rescue Quina because she gets sucked into the sand pit because she's like in despair of finding food, and then she realizes that sand is actually pretty tasty, right? And Zidane rescues them. We go back up, and then it's time to pretty soon rescue Puck from the exact same place, but now the antlion creature has come out and is acting all enraged, right? And so Puck turns out to be the heir to the Burmesian kingdom. He's the prince. Um, and rescuing him after the fiasco of the harp strings breaking, uh, the omen that means that there's going to be an invasion soon, and sure enough, the sandstorm stops. Fratley rescues our party from, well, we probably could have handled them, but a series of black mage battles that are kind of scripted and you can't avoid. And maybe it's less he's rescuing us; he's rescuing the people of Cleyra slash Burmecia who are surrounded by black mages. And so he swoops in. It emerges that Puck, on his journeys around the world, had found Fratley and brought him back just in time. Um, but in a really heartbreaking kind of exchange here that echoes the first meeting of Zidane and Freya. Now it's Fratley and Fratley forgetting who she is, right? Doesn't remember her at all, and she is just destroyed by this, really. Um, and then he goes off. He disappears, right? I found that just flummoxing because it seems like he should probably join our party, right? Like that's what amnesiac heroes do. They're playable, but he doesn't. He's still on his own journey here. And sure enough, Puck also leaves in short order at that point, and so they are off doing their kind of own quest thing. Um, we fight Beatrix right there. We lose, of course. And then, like you said, there's this teleportation system thing happening where it's Zidane first who jumps into one, and then Vivi and Freya both jump in as well. But Quina leaves the party at this point. Quina is, I think they say something like they're afraid of heights. They don't like heights, and this is a point where the story really has a kind of uh, confluence, right? Because that was one of the few truly branching aspects of the game to this point. Do you have Quina join your party when it's first possible to go to the marsh? Or do you not have Quina join your party at that point, proceed with the story and skip that? But then later here is where Quina will have to join the party. They all of their dialogue, all of the scenes involving them from the point we met them till now are purely optional and sort of extra bonus content. Um, so as much as that is pretty enriching as like a foil character for Freya in many ways, or Vivi for that matter, um, it's entirely just like uh, somehow the rest of the game would have proceeded exactly the same had we not seen all of that, which is crazy to think about actually, because I think they're such an interesting character. But anyway, so yeah, that's what I would say is like pretty important about the Cleyra section that we kind of are mopping up from our last discussion. But as you mentioned, it concludes with the summoning of Odin, which is an epic cutscene, like truly awesome. So
When it's so what you're reminding me of such interesting things because something that Queena says to Vivi is you're I'm not a human, so what's it even matter? But in this I brought
yeah.
up last time, but you're definitely a human, so don't even worry about it. And
Mm,
so one sees that even though Queena is a optional character at that point, that he, she, they is them they are already having an effect
mhm,
on Vivi, developing a relationship, developing a friendship, and it's, that's just one of the three concepts that I feel clustering in this section, particularly the Clara section: friendship, identity, and transformation.
mm,
And so we see another transformation here. Puck, who was just an enslaving young man who was called the Rat King, and apparently he was pretty close to that, right? The Rat Prince, given the Burmesians' anthropomorphized rat nature and look. But we only now find out that he's actually like Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings, sort of arranging
mm,
things, and also like
yes.
Stilton too, right?
Yeah.
Arranging, individual, and sort of like Jasmine from Aladdin, adventurous, doesn't want to just stay at home and do his duty, but he is doing something important by looking for Fratley and locating Fratley. But I bring him up because not only do we find out his identity, but Vivi says of him that that was his first friend, uses the that exact language.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Puck, even without his identity as a prince, has already transformed Vivi's life by being Vivi's first ever friend. And so then, and so this is it's interesting how a friendship in one's life can a transform one's life, but also a friendship where one doesn't understand the full nature of the person with whom one is becoming friends,
Mm.
how little that actually affects the development of the friendship. And so you think of Jasmine withholding the fact that she's princess from Aladdin, and they still develop this real relationship that survives that initial lack of truth. Um, and it would seem to be the same with Puck as well here. It didn't matter that he was a prince. It's unclear whether that would have even helped in the first place. And so it is interesting to see how relationship changes and shifts and how that relates to identity and levels of understanding of the other's
Mhm.
identity itself. While also, of course, seeing that we talked about the lifestyle of Clarence, that's obviously about to change quite rapidly with them losing their protective cover.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read that, play that in a sort of psychoanalytic way or analytical psychology. In Neon Genesis Evangelion, there was this sort of psychological concept that the enemies, not the Avas, those were the Gundam units or the mobile suits, but the other evolution of humans, the I'm forgetting what they were called, angels, of course. They
Angels.
had this thing called an active terror field, which was like their shield. But that's like a psychoanalytic concept, which is supposed to be the shield that keeps our egos away from the people around us. And so
Mhm.
I was wondering if like this were a people that in some way sort of like protected itself through some extraordinary ego defense. Like they try and keep
Yeah.
like the Village in M. Night Shyamalan or something, they try and keep outside influence out. And so that there was something sort of naturally uh, failing, that fate, at some point, this strategy is doomed to fail. And so we would
Yeah.
be there at
Yeah.
that.
No, yeah, what you're saying makes me want to say that like even we don't know ourselves, right? Like it's not just that we don't know the true background or nature of our friend, but that is happening on the level of Vivi himself, right? Is most clearly. But each of these characters, in some sense, is seeking to understand who they really are, right? And their identity is a huge theme here. That happens through, yeah, becoming more vulnerable, having all sorts of outgoing adventures as well as inward facing reflections. And in the case of the Cleyran people, the Burmesian people, that gem of theirs that was attached to the harp that was playing the song that somehow sustained the sandstorm, it's clearly not the original purpose of that magic stone,
Um,
right? Because it was taken from somewhere else and it came there and it you know, is that's not what it's meant to be used for ultimately. As we will probably be able to say with some certainty at this point, based on how Braun is suturing through these gems and what Tot said about the gems, it is probably actually related to something to do with this lost tribe of summoners, and and then the power of these summoned spells, these summoned monsters or creatures, whatever you want to call them, is profoundly linked here to destruction, of course, rather than preservation. Uh, but it seems like that's not the only possible function that they have, right? Because we see Odin do it, we see Atomos do it next, but then we see Rama also. And Rama is a much more mentoring, almost hermit-like being, but one that is also a kind of storyteller and story interpreter, and that chooses to to test, as he says, Garnet's ability to properly have an affinity with him and his power. And so all of that, is kind of around this discussion of what is Cleyra representing. Yeah, and clearly the dance that happens in Cleyra, I think, as well as echoing the theater at the opening of the game, the festival in some ways, its most clear echo is going to be with Zorn and Thorn's creepy little somersault dance that they're doing, right? These little
Uh-huh.
cartwheels,
Yes.
and, and they're chanting and they're extracting the eidolons. And the first one that they extract, evidently the most powerful, perhaps at this stage at least, is Odin himself, and that has to do with Garnet's age being 16 now. They couldn't do this until that time had elapsed for whatever reason. It's a kind of twist on what she keeps saying about why she's doing what she's doing. She left Zidane and says it's because he was treating her like a child. She says this a couple of times in a couple contexts, I think. And what that really means, I think, is basically that he was trying to shelter her, right? Trying to have a kind of protection around her, which was artificial, which was not sustainable, which was not really conducive to her own identity and growth. So there's a profound misalignment between the two of them that's going to have to be worked out in the remainder of their adventure together. But I think the other really interesting kind of foil there has got to be Beatrix, right? Because Beatrix has this persona around herself as being this untouchable knight, the greatest warrior, the greatest swordsman. And there's a truth to that, but it's also the case that she's very much being neglected, pushed aside, disrespected by Brahne under the influence of Kuja, right? So as powerful as Beatrix is, she's not Odin, right? Or maybe, who knows? But she isn't allowed to be that. She isn't given the kind of stature that she wants and the kind of role that she wants. And it's pretty clear that she's having a kind of transformation like Steiner's, where this power that she's been serving, using her own considerable power, is not actually in service of a higher goal that she can feel good about. And she's a really interesting villain in that respect who doesn't want to be a villain, whereas others maybe do. Kuja hamming it up, right? But she is very conflicted. She's very reminiscent of Celis from Final Fantasy VI, even visually very very similar. Um, and and her kind of arc here, she does at least temporarily join the party, join Freya, and Steiner then joins them. So yeah, all of that. I mean, I think it's super interesting to read these games with a kind of psychoanalytic lens or depth psychology lens. Very
Especially
viable.
thinking of the pedagogy and the relationship between sheltering and exposing, which one sees as the natural progression of these sorts of video games. One often starts, though not always in Final Fantasy, which subverts some of these themes, in sort of a sheltered home environment. This is like a very
Mhm.
typical Legend of Zelda motif, like the Ocarina
Totally.
example in the Kokiri Forest, and that or Legend of Legaia is very similar to that. It's Chrono Trigger is very similar to that, and even to
Mhm.
some extent, Earthbound is sort of like that. Oh, there's immediately an alien, the meteor there, and it turns out that your neighbor was kind of an ultimate evil, and so claims being made there. But right, her path right now is to expose herself. She's been sheltered. All she
Mhm.
knows are books. She wants to get out into the world and have an effect. And she feels a responsibility as a princess, I think, to do more than the average individual, to not just enjoy her life. Now, again, what's always interesting about this is Zidane sort of patronizingly speaking to her or to Vivi, trying to protect them, when in reality, he very much does not understand himself or
Mhm.
his own nature. And so I think you do hit on very nicely the sort of difficult tightrope of life where, like in Dante's Purgatory, one has to spend equal times working, equal times reflecting. Where, on the one hand, yes, being kind to others and helping to shelter them slash expose them insofar as they desire to do one or the other, and one has a sort of relationship where one can help them do so in good conscience, whichever one it happens to be.
Mhm.
But then one also has to look into oneself and one's own motives. And, am I giving too much outside because I'm not looking into myself? And am I, do I spend all my time, running from my problems by helping other people rather than solving my own problems? And, perhaps what I do, the psychoanalytic question is, could I do more good by making myself good than trying to improve those around me?
Mhm.
But I think how that will manifest for Zidane and other bears, and how it's already manifesting for Beatrix and Steiner in particularly, is that there's circumstances are forcing them to reflect. They have been able, again, we talked about this, because they are knights of the kingdom and have taken a holy oath to see themselves as just good. And I think you and I both see in our own professions that teachers often feel this way, right? They can do no wrong. They're already
Yes.
good. By the nature of their profession, they are angels, and angels can do no wrong. And and there's something to that, but it's one is still a human and not an angel, and therefore one can improve even if one is doing good. But that sort of thinking, at least in the lives of Steiner and Beatrix, is shown to be too simplistic to deal with the nature of the world.
Mhm.
Um, Beatrix is, like you said, like Celeste, who is herself like a proto Sephiroth. She and Kefka had experiments done on them to become uniquely powerful beings in their world, and they are. Um, and and then though Celeste, like whenever a character becomes part of your party, is then depotentiated. It's the same thing with Beatrix though too. Her HP is not like 20,000 when we have access to her, and she's not doing quite as much damage
Yeah.
alongside Freya, but she's a lot like a Sephiroth
Yeah.
for Alexandria. There is no other warrior in existence, maybe Fratley, that can stand against her. She Alexandria would seem to already be of preeminent power.
Yeah.
And so I her questioning, like Sephiroth's questioning, is interesting. Because she's like, what, I'm the greatest soldier in the world. Everybody in the world knows this and fears me. And yet, for some reason, Braun is seeking more power. And that's what
Mhm.
I think is puzzling to her. This
Yeah.
guy Kuja, and I think he's starting to show his nefariousness. Not only is he using this playful language like he's above it all, and it literally has a dragon that he can fly around.
Right.
And but why is he encouraging Braun to acquire even more power? Her life was fine. Alexandria
Yeah.
was safe. They were, and they had the greatest soldier in the world. And again, and so they were in no danger. This is not just consolidating power. She is I so let me just mention, and I think we should talk about this opening this first time we see a summon.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, I mean, so this is a long CGI, one of the longer ones that we've seen so
Mhm.
far. And we see Odin come rip through the sky, take his lance or spear, and
Mhm.
throw it down into Cleyra and blow it to hell, to blow it to smithereens.
Yep.
If there were anyone left there, they would have been. Most people would say decimated, though that's incorrect. They would be annihilated.
Yeah.
Annihilated is the right way to put it. A nihil, to nothing. Not by 1/10, which is what decimation means, even though everybody uses it to say by 9/10, or sorry, by 9/10 rather than by 1/10. It's an old Roman custom. In any case, Odin is of supreme power in this case. There is no standing against an Eidolon, and they have all the Eidolons so
Mhm.
far as we know. So she has just become godlike in her power.
Yes.
And you can see this in Braun's disfigured face. And so I wanted to mention this. Nowadays, I think when we talk about literature, we sometimes misappropriate how we talk about people in reality. And I think it's a misappropriation to be finicky about talking about the aesthetics of a character precisely because a character is represented in the way they are represented for a specific for a set of reasons.
Mm.
So while as a human in reality does not choose his or her or their genes, and it's inappropriate to comment on that because that's uncivil, it is necessary to comment on how a character looks in a video game, particularly a game that cares so much about aesthetics, like
Mhm.
Final Fantasy, and often has beautiful characters like Kuja, like Sephiroth, like uh, every character from Final Fantasy VIII and Final
Right.
Fantasy VII, basically, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, they're all gorgeous, and they looked far better than the average human in reality.
Hmm.
And so Braun is hideous. Her skin is blue. She's corpulent, but she is represented not simply to be physically hideous, but to have a hideous malevolence.
Hmm.
So her hideousness is supposed to represent her moral depravity, I think, because when one sees her her grotesquely disfigured face uh, split into this malevolent grin as she witnesses the destruction of Cleyra, we're really starting to see the nature of her character in full now. This was suggested when we first saw her childishly taking delights in the theater, and since then we've seen her conspire against her own daughter and also against her own allies. But now
Hmm.
we've seen her witness the destruction of a people, possibly the mass slaughter of individuals with glee,
Yes.
utter glee.
The I think there's two really important points that should arise at this juncture, right? So first, the way that she watches is like a play, right? This is how we've seen her from the beginning, presented as watching the action. But now her involvement is all too real, right? The way that she brings destruction down, the um, the destruction takes the form of what is unmistakably your classic JRPG representation of an atomic bomb explosion, right? This is inescapable as historical context for that particular iconography, and the blending of the Norse pantheon into that.
Mm,
I guess you can read into that too if you want.
the sky, of course.
Optional. There could have been a lot of different things that they chose to have throw that spear or that bomb, that beam. They chose that, which is, huh. Okay, but then the other thing is that this is also juxtaposed with Zidane and Garnet running across the grass and observing, unable to do anything about it, the destruction of Lindblom, which is only partial, right? And so this time we see it from their perspective, and we see their faces as they watch this horrible giant maw opening and vacuuming up all of the people and stuff of the city of this
And you hear
glorious, beautiful fairy
screaming.
tale city.
That's the eerie thing, hearing, these people being sucked up
Yeah,
and, to God, hell for all you know, the inside of this creature or some different dimension, equally bad.
yeah. Yeah, they can only speculate what happened to those people. They think they're dead, but who knows, right? And then it winks out of, this dimension and goes away. And and in that case, we we're observing it from a sympathetic perspective. We're seeing these, although they're kind of chibi animated, they are like recognizably beautiful and good, morally good characters expressively that's being shown to us. Um, Aside from all of the actual, experience we have playing as them. Uh, and so I think that contrast, as you're saying, the imagery alone is making that contrast abundantly clear. The complexity of the game enters into, well, so what is up with um, saying that there is a parentage in some way between the one and the other, right? Even if it's not genetic or whatever, like if she's not her mother, Garnet still thinks of her as a mother, still treats her as a mother, still wants to reason with her and appeal to her as a mother. And so that's awful to think about, right? Like the kind of dark mother sort of archetype there on full display. And then on the other hand, this opens up this kind of bottomless mystery of, well, if she's not the mother, then where is Garnet coming from? Who is Garnet, right? Who is Zidane? Who's Vivi? Again, this is kind of the core question that the game is posing in all these different ways. Um, I think the fact that Lindblom surrenders is also really interesting. They um, are in some way a more formidable military power than Cleyra and Bermesia,
Mhm.
and yet they have the foresight, the leadership, rather than the king running away as the Burmesian king did. The ruler Sid stands up, he surrenders, and fully expects that when Queen Brahne is vulnerable, they will counterattack. They say this in as many words. So that juxtaposition is also instructive, I think.
And they have to give up all of their, but they have to give up all of their ships, including the prototype for the moment.
Yes,
But
yes.
you're, but that is interesting that their tactic is obviously insurrection from the beginning. They say we need to live to fight
Hmm.
another day, and this is a very different aesthetic from what you would imagine the Dragon Knights of Burmecia have. They
Yeah.
have this older, more, concept of nobility, and that might lead to more binary thinking when it comes to winning and losing, and not so much thinking of the future of their own people necessarily, but thinking of their own honor in
Mm.
a way that was developed, in the games surrounding Final Fantasy VII that taught us about the sort of ethic of being a part of soldier. But I wanted to mention you bring up so Braun is obviously the Dark Mother and also possibly the madraste, the stepmother, too.
Hmm.
And these
Yeah, there you go.
both have a bit of a negative connotation. I mean, one doesn't have to even go back to the 90s and watch what was the name of that children's comedy where the child was not Dennis the Menace, but it was the other really bad one. But he was known to have like a stepmother that was always working against him because he had a wealthy father to like but
Okay.
I was also thinking of more folktale, fairy tale
Yeah.
analogs. I can't remember the name of that one movie because it did not have a strong effect on me. But obviously Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and
Cinderella.
Cinderella, right? These what makes a dark mother, and I guess why a stepmother with competing children can like Cinderella can sometimes be a very good stand-in for the dark mother is that rather than giving, the dark mother seems to want to take.
Mm.
To rather than giving the birthright or preparing the person for their birthright, she wants to take it. So in Cinderella, this is clear because the prince needs to marry one of the mother's daughters, not Cinderella. Cinderella needs to be kept out of the equation to stay away from her destiny. And so there's another aspect of the Dark Mother. Rather than trying to, like Fairy Godmother, bring you towards your destiny or actual mother, Dark Mother tries to keep you away from it. And of course, there are Freudian ways of reading this, and a Jungian way where there's the absorbing mother,
Mm.
the mother that is too much, that she wants to absorb the life force of the young person. And so how that's supposed to manifest with like a young man is like he becomes one of these like Hikiko Kori guys who like
Mm.
never develops a career and therefore never learns to fly and so can't leave the nest and therefore can't leave the mother. And and so this is this is a way that one then through sort of negative family relationships and psychic mechanisms, the boy gets to stay in a family and the mom gets to, but he never develops his own,
Mhm.
as it were. And so that's one way that like the Jungians would describe a dark mother manifesting in a male's life. But here we have female to female. And so what is the thing that Braun is denying to Garnet? Well, she's denying two things, very importantly. Since she's saying that she's just going to kill her, as far as we know at this point, she is denying her birthright as queen. And she's also denying her people the white queen, as it were. Not
Mm.
not Narnia's white queen, but the sort of, as you said, chibi good queen to replace this, and who's also beautiful by the way, which means something in the ethic aesthetic of this game, which uses visual representation to tell its story besides just code and latent code, as it were. But she also literally steals something from her, and there's again a strange raping sort of aspect, a lot loss of autonomy, a going in and taking something of great. There's it's not no sorry, it's not simply like a raping or a taking a rapture. it's like a uterectomy,
Mm,
or a hysterectomy. Excuse me, I got to use my right language here. It's like taking the thing by which Garnet is going to reproduce out of her. So now she hasn't taken her physical ability to have children, but she's taken away her ability as the sort of creature she is, as we know from the future, to do the thing that is most natural to her, which is to cast Eidolons after she turns 16. I mean, there's even like an age to it, right? So
yeah.
there's similarity between it and reproduction. And so her mother, rather than, guiding her through the process of becoming a woman or becoming a summoner or becoming a queen, is denying her the queenship, is denying her even the model necessary to be a good mother or a good queen here, and is also literally taking part of her essence from her that will keep her from being the person she is supposed to be.
Mm,
As we know from what you've mentioned several times now, the grayed out summons that are actually part of her capacities in the future, we think, or when she gets enough NP, those are going to be gone.
yeah. Yeah. The I mean the use of the kind of magic uh as a analog to or something akin to the full development of the self, um, or as a window into the sort of self that each of these characters is, I think is pretty interesting. Um, we see, of course, Zorn and Thorn have a kind of dark magic. Kuja likewise seems to have a kind of power to put people to sleep. And I was a little bit mixed up about so what's going on here? Because so like the breaking of the spell, um, it it happens in a couple of ways. On the one hand, Zorn and Thorn are defeated in battle. So there's that. And so we physically rescue Garnet from her resting place on that kind of altar down below. We bring her back up, but then there's a further breaking of the spell that has to happen to actually awaken her. And that actually is Beatrix who comes in and attempts the spell like 3 times. It's a kind of fairy tale moment there. And Zorn and Thorn sit there and watch this happen. They don't try to intervene. They've been defeated, I guess, once already. And so, but that spell, if I'm not mistaken, was also actually Kuja's, right? He's the one who put her to sleep, actually. And Zorn and Thorn's spell is the extraction of the Eidolons. And so, while Beatrix is able to wake her up, we are not able to recover the Eidolons quite so quite so readily. Brahne in some way has them still, um, and is able to manifest them in these highly destructive ways. But it seems like they're almost too powerful to use in this setting, like in a domestic scene. Neither Zorn nor Thorn nor Brahne directly fight against Beatrix, Freya, and try to capture Garnet and take the remaining gem that she has. Right? They could have, I guess, at any point, but I think I'm right in saying that she still has that gem for
Yes.
whatever reason. They didn't take it from her. So there's a little bit of a, I don't know. There's something kind of odd going on there. Um, but I think the point still remains that like the kinds of magic and abilities that these characters have, again, they're not just sort of for show. They're in some way speaking to the nature of each of them and have some kind of symbolic purpose. And so in Beatrix's case, like it's this Seiken ability. It translates to something like holy sword in
Mm.
Japanese. And so there's a holy sword ability that a class of paladins or holy knights uses throughout the Final Fantasy series. And so she's squarely in that, she has the white magic as well as this kind of attack ability. And as has been pointed out, like it seems to harken back to previous games with an ability like Clem Hazard, so she's that kind of soldier, right? This kind of conflicted soldier, as well as she's got a holy spell. So she's like a a version of what Garnet will be once she learns all of her white magic later on. Um, yeah, so I just think that that's a pretty cool moment where, again, yeah, we get to briefly at least play as this kind of legendary figure. Um, not as powerful as she is when we fight against her, but hey, still pretty cool. Um, and meanwhile, when Zorn and Thorn actually catch us with the same trap as before, the only one that they're catching for the second time is Garnet herself,
Mm.
who's pretty woozy and not really
And
with it,
us. And us.
and us, the player. So when they say that, they're kind of breaking the fourth wall there. And
They
so it's
actually fell for it again. I mean, that kills me having to
yeah,
do that.
yeah, and the kind of breaking in that happens next is of Marcus and Blank, right? These kind of Lost Boy type figures that that jump in from outside of the box of the screen, like from where, who knows? But somehow they manage to get there and back from the evil forest, super soft up Blank, come all the way back and do this in that amount of time. So okay, I guess that's fine.
They're like
Um,
Julius Caesar in their ability to move from one place to another. Supposedly he could with infantry on foot move 100 miles in a day. Yeah. Uh,
okay,
Very impressive. I mean, there are people that can do that in 24 hours, usually single people. But right. Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah, and there's a good moment here where it's almost like Garnet, who Zidane calls Dagger, wants to stay behind and try to again um, confront Bronn, presumably, do a kind of Burmesian thing and face the impossible odds. But Zidane points out, like, well, actually, Steiner, Freya, Marcus, all of them are sacrificing themselves to help her. And so she would be kind of a self-defeating level of vulnerability there. There is a time to abscond, to run away. Their plan is to go to Tot in Trino and to ride the Gargan Route back there. Um, and he says two things. So he says kind of the opposite of what was said before, where he's like scolding her for not being more afraid of warfare. Um, he says they're fighting for you, but also they know deep down inside that they have to fight. And then sometimes you can't think everything out. You have to listen to your heart. Two, kind of cliche, but nevertheless, there's this a true element to those statements of his, and they have the desired effect of getting her to willingly hop into the little kind of cart uh, tramway thing that hangs from the giant beast. Um, so she is, for the moment, persuaded at least that this is the right course of action. Um, yeah. So this idea of having to fight, I mean, I think we see that in all the Final Fantasy games. That is the core mechanic and the core gameplay loop is fighting to get stronger. And then on the other hand, not thinking everything out, but listening to your heart. This is getting to that kind of theme, that kind of who am I truly deep down kind of theme of identity that's so central to this game in particular. Um, but yeah, this idea that like you, your intellect and trying to acquire more power purely rationally is probably a bad thing um, versus the kind of um, heart-informed intellect that characters like Bugenhagen and Tot represent. Like that's where we're trying to go. It doesn't work. Of course, we overshoot that because we're chased by a giant serpent. Um, but it turns out for the best. Yeah.
And so you're making me again, unfortunately, right near the end here, think so many uh things. But so much that I've become inarticulate. But like we were talking about earlier with not being able to know the nature of your friends, as you meet them, you put a lot of faith into your friends that they're going to become who they claim they're going to be when they're young, and they're going to stay people of value and or people that that they're going to fulfill the promise of the friendship, which is to become the person you expected them to be.
Mm.
And we very lucky as Johnnies, I think see a lot of our friends doing this. And like now when I have these seminars with my friends, it's like, not just my friends from grad school, but often people who are, people who I'm proud to call my friend. And
Hmm.
and because they've continued to transform into what we mutually expected them to transform into. But that, I mean, so when you talk about the nature of action and acting by your heart, characters like Squall and Steiner have trouble with that. At first, they're like, I'm going according to a canon and a rule book. I will just follow the rules. But something interesting is that Steiner and Beatrix were actually split from a single character originally. So he was supposed to be a noble,
Oh.
not like a paladin, but he got the liquid snake treatment and got given all the recessive characteristics, as it were. And so he's just a goofball, sort of, though he does become very strong under certain conditions. But Beatrix, I think, again, really illustrates this well, and in a way similar to Sephiroth last, though again conspicuously different in seven. In seven, he reads a bunch of books, right? This is to your point. She,
Mhm.
as a paladin, serves a power higher than her direct authority. So it's not actually drawn out that she serves like a god from this place, but she does seem to serve the good or
Hmm.
something like that. And as her authority moves away from that ideal, so does her ability to serve her in good conscience and therefore her willingness even. And so she really shows, I think, very well what you're suggesting here. Like she's she listens to her heart, she's confronted with situations that she cannot help but analyze.
Hmm.
And upon analysis, why did I live this way? She's not even grateful to me. Like it's becoming clear to her that her circumstances have changed and are no longer working in her favor. And so she has to be, this is part of the mutability of life, that even taking a
Mhm.
holy oath and working for a great empire as a major part of it, then maybe this is how CEOs always think. She's like, I can't do this anymore. And I think that's very striking to a character like a Steiner and to anybody, this
Hmm.
major defection. She has everything in Alexandria, but except for the most important thing, which is purpose and a clear conscience, which are apparently very important to her. But I wanted to mention that what's difficult with choosing friends and also with making actions is, very famously this notion of the trolley problem. It's like, how far in the future can you see the causal chain that you're starting now to know that you aren't actually in 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000 years doing bad by drinking your coffee this morning rather than doing
Yeah.
good. And there's just, I do think there are certain things that tend to have more positive chains of causality rather than negative. So it's not just relative, but there is also just a certain, uh, you know, the light only moves so far through the darkness. And so I think one can only really act ethically, like you're saying, based on what one can see at any given time. And like you mentioned, there are always going to be things beyond our intellects, maybe not by nature, but just by the fact that we can't see everything all at once and process it all at once and know what's going on. This is called the knowledge problem with people who study Austrian economics. That, well, the problem with coordinating an economy is that nobody knows everything
Mhm.
and they can't act all at once. Um, and so to ethically play this game and for our characters within the game to start relationships and join the party with each other and for them to continue to fight alongside each other, they can only base their decisions on how they feel based on what they know at that given moment. And I think that of course leads to mistakes, but then you live in the future and then you try and make up for those mistakes and you don't fail to acknowledge when you do or when one does make a mistake. And even though that's sort of a patchwork, slow, non-systematic way, non-perfectly systematic way of doing things, that is, I think, the adventure of existence,
Mhm.
which this game shows well. None of our characters so far have been beyond internal conflict and are certainly not going to be beyond internal conflict at some point. So, sometimes the protagonist himself takes longer, like Titus in 10. It takes a while for him to get hit, but he gets hit hard when he does. And it's the same. It's the same with Zidane. And it's not as hard with Squall just because of his personality. It's very hard with Cloud. Though there's a lot of foreshadowing, at least in the new versions of the game, that would let one know. But but right, I think the game is highlighting the fact that we can only ever see so much at once, and we have to act on the stage we happen to be on at any given time, and not imagine that we're on a stage far in the future or far in the past, or just a different stage from the one we happen to occupy. That where the play is where one is. The Dasein of it, the Heideggerians would say, and the so to act ethically, I would imagine, I guess I'm just putting out this theory now, is to act as appropriate as well as one can within the situation one is in.
No, no, that seems right. I mean, it's true that the confines, just to think about it like mechanically for a minute, like the confines of the world are such that our characters have very limited choice, actually,
Hmm.
right? They can only really follow a certain course in this type of JRPG. Um, but the the possible ramifications of that seemingly small number of choices do seem to ripple outwards in really powerful ways. I think that's something that games around the time that this one came out were starting to really become aware of. But that's one of the things that um, you know extra game, like outside of game research will show you about this one in particular is that really famous example of the interview where the developers are talking about a kid who wrote into them saying that playing this game in particular made him want to live, whereas he had been thinking about suicide. And who knows, maybe he went on to be one of the people who stay in their room, the hikikomori thing. Like maybe it wasn't a great life that he went on to have, but we can't know that. What we can know is that he chose to, by his own, testimony, he chose to live rather than take his own life because of playing this game, which is an amazing thing to think about.
And I think you're putting your finger on it, because so there's this strange contrast and feeling when I see the end of Final Fantasy VIII and I see the characters I've been playing with and float away. It's the end of the
Mhm.
game. It makes me sad because I'm no longer occupying the same space as they are. But within the notion that they exist some in reality, they have to age and have more stories and become new characters in these stories to some extent. All the world's a stage, and they're going to play new roles. But that is to say that the value of a story is not that it is a complete representation of everything, but that it is a representation of something. And I think that's sort of what a life is, too, that we get to be a part of these people's lives during a crucial, critical moment in their lives, during a very story-rich part. But they still have other moments I mean, they don't because they're just characters and stories. But if they were real, as it were, or, they would continue to live, there would be more stories. They'd be parents. They would be, they would have children. They would perhaps turn on each other, things.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But that's how it is in our lives. Our lives too. We're a child. We're a student. We're a teacher. We're a former teacher. We're a child, and then a father, and maybe we're really good for 30 years, and maybe we're bad for 40, and maybe we're good for another 10, or relative to whomever and whatever. But again, we get to be a part of these people's existences for a brief amount of time, and it's very rich given how much happens. And I think that tapestry is to some extent supposed to model what we would like to make of our lives. You get a very small, you're just a page that's turning in the book, maybe even just a few letters or a word, or a curve on a letter. But it's be that curve and enjoy all the letters around you, or get to know them. And because the the amount that we know and the amount that we affect is sure to be less than we imagine it to be, and so we might as well deal with what is actually real and tangibly real around us.
S-
Yeah.
I think if we can just, I mean, this seems very apropos of the next little section here, which is the appearance of Rama in the Pinnacle
Yes.
Rocks area
Yes.
outside Lindblom, where we kind of are shipwrecked on this cliff, and it's very um, beautiful forest to contrast with the kind of spooky forest that we first crashed in after leaving Alexandria the other time. And in this beautiful magical forest, there is a presiding deity of thunder magic, Rama. And Rama first manifests as an old man with a little beard, and then he very shortly transforms into a kind of god-looking fella with a big old beard, very wizard-looking. And he bids Garnet, but the party, including Zidane and Vivi as well, to go and seek out his 5 manifestations that he's placed within the forest, which is only a couple of scenes, but they're really visually striking. There's this tree and it has these kind of cells, almost like hermit cells with a kind of grill over them, and it's a kind of shrine that's alive, with moss and water and all this. And so you go around and you can save with the Moogle there with his big book, and you can deliver the letter. But you can also find the 5. I think you have to find all 5 to progress. I'm not sure. I think you can also give up. And I don't know what happens if you do, but each of them says part of a story. And so this story is actually from a previous Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy II, which I've not played. Um, it wasn't originally released in localized form, but it tells a kind of version of a story from Final Fantasy II. So what we're talking about, right, like the way that we interact with the game and then are informed by it, is being recapitulated within the game here as we're getting a story from a previous iteration of this kind of adventure, this kind of tale. And our job is to take those manifestations, those pieces of the story, put them in an order that makes sense when we retell them to Rama, who's willing to hear any order that we put them in, I think. I don't know, again, if something bad happens if you get it wrong. It's pretty obvious what the order should be. It goes beginning, obviously, then cooperation, then there's the silence. So this is where Joseph gives his life to save the troop, and the troop left without telling Joseph's daughter Nellie about the tragedy. And then the question is which of the two human or hero versions of a historian's explanation you choose. And the historian's explanation for the hero ending is that they didn't want to report the death because they felt guilty for failing to protect him. And so in the end, heroes are also human, is how that one goes. And then the hero ending says, although the death was not reported to the daughter, the manner of his death speaks for itself. This is the story of a true hero. And so they're just different versions of looking at the same events. Um,
Mm.
the fact that you can choose the one that you want to tell is, again, one of these kind of small moments of actual agency within the game. But the response there is that Rama asks you about why you chose the ending that you did. And so you can give either ending. In the playthrough that I'm looking at right now, they chose hero, versus in my playthrough, I chose human. And Garnet gives a response that's this kind of dialogue about what is the nature of a heroic story, right? So you can see her development here reflected in the way that she's reading a text, right? She's always been this reader. She recognized Rama's name from books about summoning that she'd read, she says. Um, and then she has this kind of reflection about herself as a leader, as a hero, right? Um, that what she's doing now, although it is abandoning her people for the moment, is in service of her people ultimately, right? Like you're talking about this kind of higher goal beyond the immediate uh, you know ruling or whatever that would look like, and and so then Rama becomes a gem and joins the party. Then Zidane and Vivi have a little conversation where they're speaking about the thing they just watched happen. And Zidane specifically says, "Why did you make us play this silly game?" And human and heroic are just things people say. This is a very squall kind of moment for Zidane, right? Like those are just two sides, you know, there's not like a right answer here. And so Rama responds. Vivi says, I think he would have joined either way. And Rama himself speaks and says, You're right. Um, what matters is being true to oneself. The moment that she decided to use summon magic, she gained the power, and that it can be used for good and evil, but that she's somebody that he wants to align himself with, protect, watch over, and see her grow. And so that's why he chose her. And so, yeah, so this is all to say, like, the way that we see choice represented in this game is primarily through text and choices about the text and reflections about the text. Maybe mocking, maybe self-mocking, but ultimately pretty earnest, I think, as far as like, what are we supposed to get from this? And it's immediately after this that we see them watch the destruction of Lindblom. This kind of harrowing cutscene happens, um, where their goodness, their correctness is absolutely um, like instantiated there. So yeah, I just think that whole sequence is just like really, really interesting, and really speaks to like the power of stories as these games understand themselves to be telling them.
It's a good lesson on a story within a story, a sort of dumb show or piece of ekphrasis that and is also a study in illusion because it's an illusion to something that one can only recognize if
Yeah,
one has played through and knows that story, that other story that's now being integrated in. But just to return to another platitude, it almost sounds like with the limited knowledge we have and having to listening to our hearts, that the most important thing one can do because one doesn't know the causal ramifications of one's actions is to stay true to oneself.
exactly.
And I know that that is a prosaic way of putting what we've come to, but I think it's the reasoning that we've used that has led us to this conclusion. And to me, it's been somewhat revelatory. And that's what I like about coming back to these games because I always realized there was something important, some kernel of wisdom
Hmm.
that I had to attempt to digest and so that I could reflect on it, but I wasn't capable yet of reflecting. I was too busy as a kid, had to go learn algebra and things like that, you know. But
Sure.
now talking with you, we can go back in, go back into the vault and see. And apparently, what we put in there has grown a bit, has appreciated,
Hmm.
and we're more capable of seeing it for what it is or what it was in the first place.
Hmm.
And hopefully better at doing the same with ourselves
Yeah.
by that process.
It only takes about 16 years or so, but
Yeah, no,
it's
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah. Good investment, good investment.
Yeah.
Uh, well, my friend, this I think was a wonderful talk. Thank you for playing so much, and I'm looking forward to continuing to fight through disc two here, and hopefully you're now played into the game like I said of myself around this point that I really caught the motion of the game and
Totally.
was ready to be taken along like a surfer on the tide or a boogie boarder in my case.
Right on. Yeah, no, this is good stuff. I think the next little section will have us facing those assassins, those bounty hunters that were put on our trail. We'll meet up with Quina again. We'll find the source of the Garganru beasts, I think, if we can make it through this kind of maze-like cavern. And this will bring us out to the outer continent, right? So a new part of the world.
Yeah,
So
and
that's pretty
another
cool.
desert too to match against our earlier desert with Cleyra. So we'll find something else out here and yet another desert locale.
Rock on. All right, thank you.